Hello, friends. Welcome back. Happy Monday. We are reading through the Bible in 1 year, and today is the beginning of our Exodus journey, right? How fun is that? So it's good to be jumping back in here. We're following this particular reading plan. There is a link there in the description that will take you to a blog post with this and some more information. I'm going to update that as we go and add some more resources and links to that. I will try to let you know in these videos when I update that, so it's worth you checking back in on if you've already taken a look at that before. I'm here a little bit later. Generally, I'm going to be in this time frame, but very few are joining me live. Most are watching this later. So I am not going to radically reorient whatever I have going on the day to be on here at a particular time, but generally sometime between 2:30-ish, 3 to 3:30 will most often be the time frame that I am jumping on here. If you're a person that particularly wants to be able to catch me live, then let me know, and I will try to let you know if I'm going to be way off on my schedule ahead of time, so that you can join me. So Exodus, we're in Exodus. We made it all the way through Genesis last week. We had a day off from the reading yesterday, so you can catch up or get ahead there if you like at that time. The first 3 chapters of Exodus are familiar ground for Bible readers. There's a lot of things that we've encountered and will encounter that are not familiar, even to people that have been around the faith or the Bible for a long period of time. They're just things that we neglect, or at least I have, but we're not going to do that this year. Nothing's neglected. We're through the whole entire Bible this year, and I've been particularly blessed by the things that I've not seen before, and I hope you are as well. So again, Exodus, and it's important now, and I think more interesting that we're tracking Exodus in the midst of the story that we've already been telling so often. I think this is right. There are going to be exceptions, but I think for the most part, we see the Bible as a bunch of isolated episodes or stories about people of faith or lack of faith that kind of exist almost independent from one another, just as, people that have faith or don't have faith. But I hope you've seen and will see that there's a much bigger continual narrative that's going on into which these stories fit. And that the truths of Scripture aren't just things that are said out there into the blue, but they fit into this context that we can see God at work. And we'll see themes now already in this reading today, hopefully, that are picking up. And then as time goes on, my real hope, is that you'll see repeated themes. You'll see these things building, and you'll see this narrative. Although not everything, in our minds easily fits easily, hopefully much of it will, and the big pieces and some little pieces, we'll see them repeated again and again as we go through this. So as Exodus begins in chapter 1, we see this continuity, I think, very clearly at hand, right? These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob. Wait a minute, Israel and Jacob, the same person. Remember, hopefully that's clear by now. He lists his sons and then notes that Joseph was already in Egypt, right? This is familiar territory for us now as readers, because we've walked through this now already. So we're setting up the context here for what's going on in Exodus. Verse 6, now Joseph and all his brothers of that generation died. Right, so everybody that the stories we were just reading about, page ago in Genesis, they're all gone. But the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly and increased in numbers and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Now, is that now ringing bells, those words, ideas together? Be fruitful and multiply was the Genesis command to the first, right, man and woman, Adam and Eve. That's kind of, again, that's core stuff. So it's good that God's people, this family line, is multiplied. And we see that promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as well, right? That your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, as the sand on the seashore. And so the idea that they became so numerous that the land was filled with them, that again is a fulfillment of both God's kind of command, mandate, and also God's promise to that particular family. So that I think is good, but there's some substantial bad. There's some big problems that set the scene for what's going to happen in the first, most of Exodus as it goes along. Verse 8. I'm not going to go through these 3 chapters verse by verse, but I want to focus for a minute on the setup, and then we'll look at Moses in particular and how his particular story is set up. Verse 8. Then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing. Remember, Joseph meant everything to the Pharaoh when he was there, right? He was second in command. He had all these blessings and power, really, and authority in the midst of that. But now there's a new king. Joseph is dead, and the king now doesn't even know who Joseph was, or doesn't remember any kind of pause. But it means nothing to him that Joseph did all that he did. He said, "Look," verse 9. He said to his people, "The Israelites have become far too numerous. So for him, how many of them is a problem. They're now a potential threat. Come, we must deal with them shrewdly, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out," and here's the potential concern, right? As war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. It's interesting that would be the threat. You would think that if they were getting along well and Egypt was a good host and taking good care of them, then and they've been living there for so long, that if an enemy attacked, they would say, "Hey, this is our home. We're part of this Egyptian thing. We'll fight alongside of them." So, is this Pharaoh's, is it paranoia? Is it realistic? I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. I think if he was doing things right, it would be different. But in any case, it is what it is, right? That's his particular mentality. So in response to that, they put slave master, I'm in verse 11 now, slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor and to build these store cities, right? So this is slave labor. They were given space to do their flocks and do their thing and grow, and that was a good thing. Now they're being used as slaves in order to build. So many building projects in the ancient world were done by slave labor. So there it is. And then about the concern about there's too many of them, the Pharaoh's idea was, we'll slow this down by killing off the baby boys. Why the boys? Well, the girls could be married off to Egyptian, men, to their Egyptian boys, and then they would increasingly become less a part of the Israelites, the Hebrew culture, and more a part of the Egyptian culture and the Egyptian gods and those kind of things, and have babies for them so that they could be more numerous. So, and eventually that would kind of be like what would have to happen if there was a whole generation of girls with no boys. If they wanted to have families and all that, they would have to go to Egyptian guys, right? So that's the idea here, I think, is to not allow the boys to live, but let the girls live. The Hebrew midwives, right, the ones who brought the babies into this world, it's fascinating. It's fascinating that their names are given. I'm wondering so I've not done the research to look to know, do these names so often in the Hebrew, like more often than not, the names mean something and it relates to the story. I don't know if that's the case here or not, but it's fascinating that their names are preserved in the story. These two, what would be in the grand scheme of things, and then the other time, just, a normal part of the culture, not any better or worse than anybody else, but certainly, to be named in the Bible like that is pretty cool. So they're an important part of the story, and these women are brave because they subvert and really defy the Pharaoh's command to them, right? To get rid of these. It's like the opposite of what they're calling their job is, and so they don't do it. They have an excuse there. That these Hebrews women, they give birth before the midwives have a chance to get there to help out. So we can't get to them in time to kill them. And then the Pharaoh gave this order, verse 22. But that, I mean, you could spend some time reflecting on these midwives and their courage, their bravery to do that, actively potentially putting their own lives at risk to do this. Control in verse 29, because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own, right? So God blesses them in this situation. So Pharaoh gave this order to all the people: every Hebrew boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. Right. So this is now beyond just the midwives, this order to all his people. Amongst these Hebrews, if there's a little baby boy, throw him in the Nile. That's the king's command for that to happen. And of course, this story will carry forward into the New Testament after the birth of Jesus, with King Herod and in the threat that he felt that this baby born king of the Jews would be, where he does a similar heinous act, right? In a more limited maybe capacity, though, in that case. So chapter 2, that's the setup of the whole, that's the context, the conflict of what's going on here in the midst of this. Now chapter 2 brings us to Moses, introduces us to Moses for the first time. Get a sip of coffee here. Now a man from the tribe of Levi. So we've learned about the brothers and things now, and we'll see that the tribe of Levi, the Levites, are going to have a very special role to play in the future, not too far future. So we'll see that happen again. And Moses is part of the tribe of Levi. Okay. So this man marries a Levite woman from the same tribe, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. So this is going to be Moses' parents, right? When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him, of course, because of these orders of Pharaoh. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. And I believe with words and imagery here, we're supposed to understand this basket as an ark. Remember Noah's ark that carried them safely through basically the destruction of everyone around them. But this family that God was going to use was carried safely through that destruction in this ark with tar and pitch, I believe, and similar words. It's been a little while since I've gone and traced back these kind of Hebrew words together, right? But so again, what I'm wanting us to see again and again and again and again and again and again and again is repeated imagery, repeated words, things that are coming through the story, that these aren't isolated. They're all connected in various ways, back, now, and forward in different ways, right? So that's kind of cool stuff, I think. So she places the child in it and kind of just, if I keep him at certain death, this is really risky, but I'm going to sort of, I'm going to take a chance. And of course, that works out well. It's paid off. She placed the child in it among the reeds on the bank, probably strategically, right? And his sister, we'll meet her more in a bit, stood at a distance to see what would happen. Pharaoh's daughter goes down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants are walking along the riverbanks. They see the basket, and they sent her female slave to get it. Is a crying baby, and she felt sorry for him. And this is so many interesting things in here. We just don't have time to really talk about in depth, right? But she's Pharaoh's daughter. She knows the desire and commands of her father, the Pharaoh, that these Hebrew babies are to be wiped out. But she encounters this one little baby crying, and she has compassion for him, right? For Moses. So the midwives are subverting the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh's daughter is subverting the Pharaoh. Of course, his desires are evil. And so that kind of subversion is a good thing, right? I think we would say so. Interesting things to wrestle with here about, when is it appropriate to kind of go against the commands of the government, of the powers that be? It's a big question, right? And so we see that kind of in play here, I think. So this is really a neat story. Verse 7. His sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yeah," she said. "That's a great idea," right? So the girl went and got the baby's mother. So, right, Moses' mother, in order to save him, let him go, but then she's actually taking care of him and nursing her own son, who would otherwise be potentially at threat for death. So the reversal and the irony here in this is really cool. In this story, check this out. Take this. I'm in verse 9. Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So a representative of this oppressive government is now paying Moses' mother to do what is illegal to do and keep this son. That could be God at work right there. Cool stuff. So she did that, but then when he's older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So he's the adopted grandson of the Pharaoh. And she named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Okay, so that's cool. So things are bad in the midst of it, this kind of bright spot. But then things are still bad otherwise, and things are going to get challenging for this particular Moses as well. So we're fast forwarding now all the way into his adulthood. In the case of one verse, right? So that's interesting. Verse 11. One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his people were and watched him at their hard labor. Right, so he's now he's comfortable, but his people are hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, which probably happened a lot, unfortunately, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" This man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. So Moses is no longer the kind of darling adopted Hebrew child here. Now he is on the run. So he's fled. He went to live in Midian, and then we have this story of sitting down by a well. So a lot of well stories here, right? Remember which of the patriarchs encountered his? Well, actually, no, it wasn't him, but how one of the patriarchs got his wife was Isaac and Rebekah. There was Abraham sent his servant to go there and met her by the well. We know Jacob dug a well. We'll see in the New Testament, John's Gospel, chapter 4, right, that Jesus encounters a Samaritan woman at Jacob's well. So a lot of things going on here at wells throughout the biblical story. Again, just kind of interesting. These little maybe aren't like big themes, but there's big themes. There's kind of medium themes, and there's like all the way down, up and down. There's little things, connections, medium, etc. Wells is kind of one of those. It's not the biggest thing, but it's something. It's in there. In that situation, they happen a lot. They're a gathering place, right? The place where water, and they all needed it. So Moses lent a hand, and these women who encountered him said so. And Moses is invited to join him in verse 21, and all of a sudden he's got himself a wife. Okay. His daughter Zipporah. I love that name, Zipporah. I've never known anyone named Zipporah, but it's a cool sounding name, I think. So they're married. He has a son, and verse 23, during that long period, that king of Egypt died, but things aren't any better. The Israelites, okay, so now this is where the story's picking up again, and into chapter 3 is the end of our reading for today. So, but at the end of chapter 2, let's read this just for a second. Verse 23. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. And their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. Track this, we've seen already, went up and went down. Their cry went up to God. God comes down to see what's going on. This kind of theme here that's starting to develop, and I say starting because I know we'll see more of it, just because I know some of what's ahead, right? In this situation, God heard their groaning, and He remembered His covenant with Abraham. There's an article that I'll throw in the comments here about forgetting and remembering, because this is something that we don't track with in the same way. So let me think for a second. Okay, God heard their groaning, and He remembered the covenant with Abraham. Now, do we really think that God forgot? Like, oh, wait a minute, something happened with that Abraham. What? Oh man, I made him a covenant promise, and I reaffirmed it like a bunch of different times over time. Forgot all about that, but now I remember, right? That would be a pretty lousy view of God. So in the biblical story, oftentimes, I don't want to say, all the time, but oftentimes remembering is action, not just cognition, right? Remembering means God's going to do something because of that covenant. It's not like it's in His mind. It wasn't in His mind, but it's action related. And meanwhile, forgetting means not acting on it, right? So for later on, we'll say forgetting their sins means that God's not treating us in light of our sins. And so remembering in this case means acting on His covenant promises. God's gonna act now for His people in a particular way, and that's the Exodus situation. Of course, it's more involved than that. So Moses is one day, beginning of chapter 3, and I'll try to wrap up here before too long, tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. Talk about major themes. Shepherding. Everybody shepherding. Again, because that's just kind of what was necessary in that world, oftentimes to survive, particularly with nomadic people. But shepherding becomes a theme that becomes, it's not really so much right now, but it becomes a spiritual theme. I don't know if leadership is the right word, but kind of, right? So we saw, remember, Rachel was a shepherd. Joseph was out, and brothers were out shepherding. King David is going to be a shepherd. All right. Moses is a shepherd. So this becomes kind of and we'll see it a lot more as well. Jesus, of course, is the good shepherd, and the prophets, those who are responsible, kings and priests and leaders, are referred to as shepherds. Such a consistent theme really throughout the Bible. So he's out there taking care of the flocks. On the far side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, which is another word for Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. Now, it wasn't the mountain of God that he knew of. It was not like, I'm going to the mountain of God, but because of this moment and future moments, this is going to be a particular theme. And mountains, guys, is also a big theme that we see some of it, but we don't see enough of it. But we're gonna this year, because I'm gonna point it out to you. This is a mountain, Mount Sinai, right? We'll see later in Exodus. Here, the law is given, and many other things throughout the Bible. But if we just want to real quick fast forward to the New Testament and look at Matthew's Gospel, the Sermon on the Mount, the transfiguration of Jesus happens on a mountain. Jesus dies on a mount, if you will. And the Great Commission he gives from a mountaintop or hilltop as well, right? So a lot of stuff going on there with mountains, and and that kind of is I don't know if it started here, because the idea is also that Eden, and we'll see that later, was kind of on a mountain. And as well, there's the man-made attempts to make meeting places with God, the high places, and then we have the Tower of Babel. So again, I could do a whole biblical theology of it, but I'm kind of cluing you in on some things to look for, and some things that you hopefully see now that connect forward in those particular ways. So the famous burning bush, and that's where we'll end our time here today, right? If you see me looking up here, I have a little clock counter that tells me how long I've been talking for. My goodness. There, verse 2, and the imagery here is always so interesting and mysterious and wonderful. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Okay. So Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it didn't burn up. So Moses thought, we're told, I will go over and see this strange sight. Why the bush does not burn up. So it almost seems like it's kind of like an oddity to him. That's interesting. Please believe it or not, there's a bush that's on fire that never gets burned up. But when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him. So angel, fire, bush, God, these things going on here, right? It's kind of like with Jacob wrestling with however that was going on, right? We talked about that some at that point. When God saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush. Moses, that would have freaked him out, right? And Moses said, here I am. Here I am. It's a good response. We'll see some similar, basically, responses as well, too, right? Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for where you are standing is holy ground, right? Cool stuff. This reminds me back to Jacob, where he says, the Lord was in this place, but I knew it not. It's probably King James, right? The Lord was in this place, but I didn't know it. I didn't know it before, but now I know it. And that's the case with this as well, too, which raises the question, right? Where can everywhere be potentially holy ground that we're not aware of? And what does it mean for Jesus to later say, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there in the midst with them? We'll see when we get to that. Then he said, verse 6, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. I don't have any comments yet, by the way. You guys, what are you guys thinking about this story and stuff? You don't got to wait for me to ask, to share your own thoughts or questions or whatever. You're along for the ride. I am the God of your, I'm not just any God, right? There's a lot of gods, and they thought in their world, right? Especially in Egypt, he would have grown up in the house of Pharaoh with a lot of different gods. They would have, worshipped, if you will. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So now we know, when we see that, all the stories that we studied in Genesis, all of God's in that. And when he says, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he means the family line, but he has in mind, I think, all the promises, the covenant promises made and affirmed and reaffirmed in saying that. I'm the God, I'm this God with these promises made to your forefathers, right? Excuse me, verse 7. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and so I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down. Remember, gone up, cry, gone up, God come down. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. That was a promise already made, right? But they were paused there in Egypt, but Egypt was never their destination. It was never their permanent home, right? They were supposed to be in the promised land ultimately. And so God's now remembering, acting upon that to free his people and also to bring them into the land that he promised for them. Verse 9, and now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So what's God going to do? God has seen their cry of his people. He said, I'm going to act. So what does he do? Well, we fast forward to the kind of supernatural things that God does. But look at this, then the very next thing. Verse 10. So now I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, up out of Egypt. And maybe I'll just end here. I mean, we go on, who should you say I am? I am who I am. Of course, Jesus picks up on that. Before Abraham was, I am. He uses this I am. And throughout all the I am statements of John, come back to this, right? This is the foundation, this revelation of God. So I hope you're seeing this and liking all these connections that we're seeing here throughout this. But I'll just, half an hour. Jeez Louise, I'm long-winded. We expect God to just sort of act unilaterally. But through most of the biblical story, God acts through people. And from page 1, that was God's intention. That is not plan B. That is plan A for God to act through his people. Remember, we are the image of God, right? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, have dominion over it. God's not said, hey, live here. I'm having dominion. He's saying, I'm going to work through you. It's through us. It's through Moses. It's through people, through prophets, through kings, through priests, through God himself as a human in the person of Jesus, right? And then the Holy Spirit comes and empowers us. It's always, we say it's not about us in a selfish way, but it's about God using and flowing through us to accomplish his purposes. And I don't think we really sometimes believe it or want to believe it or acknowledge it, because you know why? I think sometimes it's easier not to. We don't want that level, that depth of responsibility, but you know what? It's ours. That's how God works so much of the time. Yes, there are supernatural. I mean, there's going to be these plagues that happen in the parting of the sea, like these things. Yes, like God intervenes in these ways at times and places, but on a regular basis, he wants to use us, people, right, to accomplish his will, not on our own, in his power, in his strength, with his ability, not our own. To do it. So it's never about independence from God, like we do it because God isn't, but it's about God using and empowering us to do what he wants us to do. And I think that's worthy of some reflection. Okay, I'm out of time. I'm just going to take a look at these couple comments here. I find Moses' response so interesting in real to life today. Who am I to do this work? I am unable. Find someone else, Lord. Yeah, that in a sense is good, I think. It's a good place to be humble and not to, well, of course you picked me, God, because I'm the best of the best, right? It's good to be humble, but Moses kind of went a little too far, and I think in the narrative kind of frustrates God. So we see because of his, there's a difference between realizing, who am I? I'm not qualified for this. But then ultimately we have to trust God. And God says, okay, well, if you want me to do it, I'm gonna do it, right? Whether I'm qualified or not. And so that's the wrestling match, I think. Can't you see all my shortcomings, Lord? The answer is, with Moses and with us, yes, he can see. And probably, given the way that God turns everything upside down throughout all these stories, probably it's our weaknesses that is potentially the very reason that God chooses us to do certain things, right? A combination of weakness and willingness is a beautiful thing in God's kingdom. Weakness, humility, but willingness and faith to trust is a powerful combination. All right, I'll see you tomorrow. We're moving forward in Exodus. It's going to take us 2 weeks. Tomorrow we're in chapters 5 through 8. I'll see you guys then.